Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Multispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. It's 855-450-6624. Send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Evan, who is live and remote from... Where are you at?
I'm in Dallas, Texas.
Dallas, Texas. And, if you've seen any of the bumper stickers that say, I'm from Texas, what country are you from?
I haven't seen any like that yet.
So we'll be a little more accommodating to you should we have any audio hiccups or anything like that. But we appreciate the fact that, man, even when you're traveling to Dallas, Texas, you still make the time to make it for the Ask Noah show. Are you at liberty to talk about what you're doing down in Texas?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it. So I'm down here. I'm visiting a client, and one of the things that I've really, really liked about this client in particular is the stakeholder that is in charge of the project. He's a developer that moved into management, and he is managing an infrastructure and database group. They specifically hired him because they didn't want somebody who grew up on infrastructure to take over this role. And man, if I don't enjoy conversations with this guy, just like it is rare that I meet someone that I just dig in technically with. And part of that is most of the people don't know what I do or can't relate. Like, love going to Linux conference, and sure, everybody talks about Linux, but that's not the same thing because I don't live at that same level as other people because I deal with enterprise software.
Sure.
Right? And this guy is the ideal match for me from the perspective of I need an idea guy. I'm an implementer, right? There are some people, they just come up with ideas and throw them out all over the place, and it's really exciting, but they never really take off because they're idea people, and they don't necessarily get down to brass tacks about where do I start with things. And so this guy is an idea guy, and I love talking with him. I actually picked up a tool that I'm going to write to see if I can get it incorporated with one of our products based on the conversations I had with him. So we're down here doing a migration from one hypervisor to another, and from one hypervisor to OpenShift virtualization. And the team here has been great, but like everybody, it's one of those things where somebody else set the timeline, and now we're kind of scrambling to accommodate the tasks in the time frame we've been given. Not that you'd know anything about that, right?
Can you talk a little bit about I think what I'm hearing you say is it's a function of being in the same room as somebody who is as smart, or maybe in some cases smarter, and so it's a two-way street. You learn as you're sitting around. Every discussion you have takeaways, you can bounce ideas off of and absorb ideas from. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I mean, I love doing like the Linux like home lab stuff. Like that's fun, but that doesn't get me all charged up because as we've well documented over the last 5-6 years. How long have I been appearing actually on the show, Noah? Like
something like that.
5-6 years, something like that. In order for me to adopt a new open source project, you have to you can be all excited about it. That's great, but I'm not going to get excited until I can figure out how this is actually going to fit into my usage pattern, right? Like it has to be something like significantly tangible for me to move. And even then, like I will contort myself to stay on this thing because I'm technical enough to kind of twist around it. So all that to say is going to Linux conferences and talking to people, I love listening to the things that people are passionate about, but I'm not passionate about just trying random projects or whatever. It has to solve a real need. And so when you get together with an idea person, they've encountered a problem, they identified a problem and started working on like thoughts on how to get around that problem. And particularly when you're talking to someone who is working in the same space, that's where it gets exciting for me, right? Because yeah, I can completely picture that problem, and I can see, and I bet you I can pitch in there and help because I have this level of knowledge, and like how do we move this thing forward? That really drives me.
That's cool. And I assume a lot of this is the side conversation, the side thing. It's not so much the actual client work itself. It's some of the other things that are connected into it or connected around it.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things, it's intangible. And there are some management that really get the idea, the value of being in person, because it's not what you're going to achieve. So he asked me today, what would be a success for me for this week? And I told him, honestly, like at the point we're at in this project, getting to know the people and having unofficial conversations is a much bigger benefit than trying to work out any one huge milestone, because at this point we've at least set the milestones and we're moving forward. And so I asked him the same thing, and he said the whole point for this is to get me FaceTime with some of the architects on their side, and establishing that face-to-face. Like I've heard you say this before, is like when you talk with someone online, that's one thing, even if it's a voice thing. But when you meet them in person and you shake their hand, it alters the relationship.
Absolutely. It's just a different eyeball to eyeball, as one of the listeners of my other shows says to me all the time. There is no replacement for eyeball to eyeball. You can get a long ways, and this is not me saying you cannot build genuine relationships online. Neither Steve or I are saying that. Neither one of us believe that. In fact, you and I had what I would consider to be a fairly robust relationship prior to you moving to South Dakota and us spending more time in person. But there's just something different when it's in person. That's really cool. I appreciate the fact that you are doing this, and yet at the same time that you're doing this, you still make time to join us for the program. That's awesome, Steve.
Well, I mean, it all goes back to just talking to people about things that get us excited. And I like to hear what other people are what interest spheres have come into their attention during the previous week.
Absolutely. And you can join us in a number of different ways to share that with us. One is in the Mumble room. You can go to mumble.minddrop1.com and connect. You can join us in the chat room at geeklab.ninja, or you can join us on the phone at 855-450-NOAH, 855-450-6624. And of course, as always, you can send feedback to live@asknoahshow.com. So one of the things that caught my interest this week, Steve, passion project from a person who wants to make it easier for people to switch from Windows to Linux. So you're going to hear a lot about this in the next 2 weeks. Why? Well, because there's a deadline coming up in which Microsoft is no longer going to publish security updates for Windows 10. They want you to move to Windows 11. The problem is not every computer is compatible with Windows 11. It needs to have a TPM 2.0 chip. It has to meet certain requirements, and if it doesn't meet those requirements, Microsoft won't support you installing Windows 11 on it. Now, depending on what statistic you look at or where you get statistics from, you can choose to believe that we are somewhere between 30 and 50% of machines upgraded. Again, depends on the industry and depends on where you're getting statistics from, but I've yet to see anything that suggests anything more than 50% of machines have been upgraded. So your choice. You either choose to believe that companies, they have it on lock, as my kids would say. They are either going to take the money that they have budgeted and purchase a bunch of Windows 11 computers in the very near future, or you choose to believe they're not aware of this deadline and or likely don't care about this deadline because they don't understand the impacts. Was the computer going to stop working on the day after? No. Okay, well, so we're going to push it down the road. I don't know why. Well, I don't see why we'd have to spend any money. I mean, it was working yesterday. It'll be working tomorrow. It'll be just fine. And I think that's going to be the attitude of an awful lot of people. And the part they don't know is every day after the October 14th deadline, Microsoft is playing all manner of games. You can pay to get updates. You can sign up for a Microsoft account and sign in and sync your data to get free updates. They will likely kick the deadline back when they get close. So a number of different games they're going to play. But in the end, we are going to hit a point in which you will no longer be able to get updates on Windows 10. And at that point, those machines are going to get less and less secure. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to start moving people over to something else. So you can either upgrade your machine and continue on with Windows 11, or we move on to something else. And there are a number of different Linux distributions, and there's a number of different software developers that would really like to have users land on Linux. And so there is a user by the name of Operis. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And they have released a project called Operis, which makes sense. It's a Windows to Linux migration tool that seamlessly transfers files, program settings in place from Windows 10 to Ubuntu. No technical knowledge required. And so the idea here is that it's almost like if you've ever used a Mac, when you sign in and it says, do you want to transfer your data from a Mac to another Mac, from a Windows PC to a Mac, those sort of things. And it will encapsulate, it'll look at the computer and say, does the user have Chrome installed? Does the user have Firefox installed? Does it have LibreOffice installed? Does it have Thunderbird? And it will try to, best it can, one-to-one those programs over. It will try to, best it can, encapsulate all of the data that's there, the Chrome profile, the Firefox profile, those sorts of things, move all of that over there to try to make it as seamless as you can to move the data over from a Windows machine to a Linux machine. And I guess my question to you, Steve, is do you see this as a valuable tool? Does this get any of the juices flowing for you by way of, yeah, that's going to make it really easy for people to land on Linux? Or is this solving a problem that nobody's having?
Well, I can't say that we know that nobody's having it, because that would imply we have some sort of way of tracking that.
Sure, it's a broad brush. I agree.
I think that it's not. I think that any tool that exists, as long as it does what it does well, and is very clear about what it doesn't do, and that's more the key, is a welcome addition into the ecosystem in general. I really support people who want to make migration tools or any tools that, you know, maybe this person is just doing it for the 5 people in his life that might actually do that, like take advantage of this. And that's worth his time, because you know what? Maybe they've got a couple of computers each, like a laptop and a desktop, or who knows, right? Mm-hmm. And it becomes a form of automation. And maybe you're learning it to learn a new programming language, or a new mode of operating within a programming language that you already know. There's all kinds of motivations for this, and I think that it's good to have this tool, and I think that as long as it's well documented as to what it can't do, I think it's a good thing.
Here's the only thing I struggle with by way of necessity is, so in order for this tool to land, I am choosing to believe that there is a user out there that can somehow get a Linux distribution, somehow put it onto a flash drive, somehow install it onto their computer, but doesn't know how to move all of their programs and data over. And I guess the only real exception to that is, I suppose there's always the option that, right, like they buy a computer from System 76, and so they have this new computer and it runs Linux, and so now they have an easy way to move over. But absent buying a computer pre-installed with Linux, it seems like this is a tool to make things easier, but there is a whole bunch of prerequisite work that's not going to be easier that you'd have to do before the tool would be useful.
Such as?
Well, install the operating system, partition the hard drive, before you can migrate something to Linux, Linux must exist on the system, right?
Well, so my counterpoint to that would be a normie isn't going to find this. So, you know, they're not going to find this like in a vacuum anyway. So it's likely that you or I or someone in the audience who becomes aware of this is already there, right? So people are not going to be like, oh, I'm looking for a migration tool to a thing that I've never heard of before. So there's going to be some level of familiarity to begin with if you're going to make a discovery of this tool anyways.
Okay.
Right. So whether this is Noah comes to client and says, "Hey, Mr. Client, I've got an easy tool that will slide this all over and it's nice and automated," or it's, Steve hooking Grandpa up with a slide over and everything just shows up for him. All of those are valid use cases, and probably the primary use case, because I don't think most of the things on GitHub, especially tools that are kind of esoteric to begin with, are looking to make massive discoveries. Like you don't put it out there hoping that the masses will just discover it. It's probably a targeted niche.
That is a very fair counterpoint. I hadn't considered that. So you would say this is a tool in the toolbox for those that are trying to help people switch over to Linux, not so much the newbie downloads it off the internet and somehow magically converts themselves to Linux. That's a much more logical approach. I kind of like that.
I could see this being used with like the Nix book thing. If you could integrate that, I could see that being like a really good on-ramp.
I completely agree. I have to be honest with you. So I've done a pretty solid, I shouldn't say solid, it's still the use case of my itty bitty tiny little podunk town, but I've done a use case of Nixbook versus Endless OS, and I load them both up on a machine, and I have tried letting people choose, like, hey, which one of these do you like? And by far, the gravitation seems to be to, I should say, Endless OS and not so much Nixbook. And in a way, I'm somewhat disappointed in that, because I thought I would get a split. The Mac users would be more inclined to look at at Endless OS, and I thought Windows users would be more inclined to look at Nixbook. But that has not been my experience so far. It was almost like 90-10.
So I have a little tangent for you on the Endless OS thing.
Okay.
So one of the things that you run into with an immutable operating system, and of course this is a duh statement, is like you can't really install anything outside of whatever's available in Flatpak.
Duh.
Right? Except that you can if you end up wiggling it in there. So for example, getting Tailscale working on there, I figured out how to do that, because there's no real instructions for how to do these sorts of things on an immutable operating system, because Tailscale has to have all of the access, which is sandboxed by Flatpak and all that kind of stuff, right? So you'll find like something like Trayscale, but Trayscale expects the Tailscale daemon to be on the system. So there are system level things you might have, and if you do a search on the internet for this, you'll find people talking about having to rebuild the do they use, I think it's OS tree. I think they're using OS tree based immutability, and how you might do that. And I looked at that and I went nuts to that. I'll figure this out in a different way. And so one of the things that I've done recently was I wanted to be able to use something like Prometheus, the Prometheus stack on Endless, for a multitude of reasons. And there is a tool from the Grafana people who also integrate with Prometheus, like right off the hop. There's a tool called Alloy, and Alloy can grab metrics and push them to an endpoint, as opposed to having so Prometheus develops metrics, like gathers metrics and then posts them to its own endpoint, and then a centralized server has to scrape them. Alloy can push Prometheus metrics to an endpoint, but more interesting to me, it can also grab logs and pre-format them and push those logs into Grafana's logging stack called Loki, so that you can, from Grafana, you can look at logs. Why is this interesting? Because without going into too much detail, we've had an interesting situation where we were trying to track down what computers were going to which addresses. And I needed to make it accessible to my wife. So I gave my wife a Grafana link and said, look, here you can go, and you can just, in the Grafana instance, you can just click on the computer name and you can see everywhere that computer went. And so that it was a process of, how do I get Alloy on Endless OS? Because you obviously want to start as a service and all that sort of stuff. And so it's immutable, but it's also, if with a requisite knowledge, it's flexible enough. Like that sort of change that I made is not going to break the operating system. And if you have the requisite knowledge, it actually is becoming more and more of a solid choice. Like I've loaded Tailscale on there and Alloy and a few other things that you can't just install with Flatpak. So I just continue to really appreciate the immutability, but then the ability to tinker with something. Like there are some, if you figure it out, there are places you can put things that are not wiped out on reboot.
Is any of this stuff, how do I frame this question? Is the way that you work around these things a consistent thing, or is it case by case, everything is different just depending on what it is you're trying to do?
So generally speaking, I would say if you're trying to like have binaries and start them as services, that is a consistent way that you can do that. In the case of like logs and metrics, you have to have somewhere to spool them, right? And so you have to have a directory that will persist across reboots, because otherwise what will happen is the binary is going to complain the directory doesn't exist. So, and it's the same thing with Tailscale needed a socket, and that was proving really challenging because it wants to create a socket in var run, but var run is not available to you in Endless OS because you get like a read-only error, because only the stuff that loads with the system can write there. So some things are really tricky, like finding spots to put sockets and other types of files, and it just took a little bit of reading, and it's just Linux under the hood. So
1-855-450-NO. It's 855-450-6624. The email, live@asknoahshow.com. Oop, that's not the right button. This button.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of September 28th, 2025, here's the Linux and open source news. GNU Core Utils 9.8 is out. The Postgres team has announced the release of Postgres 18. NVIDIA launches an open source physics engine and its Groot robot model. OBS Studio 32.0 is now available. The RPM package format has been updated to a 6.0 release. And the 6.17 version of the Linux kernel has also been released. In distro news, Chaos 2025-09 is out. Kali Linux 2025.3 is now available with new and updated tooling. And Neptune OS 9.0 is available for download. In open source AI news, Memverge unveils a new open source memory layer for LLMs. Tencent has released a new audio model called SongPrep. And Inclusion AI has released the world's first open source 1 trillion parameter model. And lastly, in security news, the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, has added a critical security flaw impacting the sudo command line utility for Linux and Unix-like operating systems to its known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, citing evidence of active exploitation in the wild.
Google has announced that they are going to require developers to participate in registration. Now, that's not new. We've talked about that on the program before. What is new is F-Droid says if this happens, it's the end of the F-Droid project. The F-Droid project, which distributes open source apps for Android, will end if Google goes ahead with its plans to enforce developer registration for app installation, according to the project's board member, Mark Prudhommix. In a post today, he said that Google's planned changes are simply incompatible with F-Droid. Quote, the F-Droid project cannot require that developers register their apps through Google, but at the same time, we cannot take over their application identifiers for the open source apps that we distribute, as that would effectively seize exclusive distribution rights to those applications. If this were to be put into effect, the developer registration decree will end the F-Droid project and other free and open source app distribution sources as we know them today. The project has a policy of no user accounts by design in order to remove the possibility of tracking its users. Google, on the other hand, claims that these changes are being introduced to protect users from bad actors spreading malware and scams. According to the official post last month, restricting apps from verified developers creates accountability. The company argues that side-loaded apps have over 50 times more malware. By contrast, F-Droid is arguing that It's more secure than the Play Store because every single app is open source. The code is available to audit by anybody. And F-Droid references a recent post on malware in the Play Store downloaded 19 million times that claims that the new restrictions are more about consolidating power and tightening control over the formerly open ecosystem. So here's the long. First of all, let's start with some healthy pushback. Steve, do you think that there is any room that this is maybe a bit overblown, or we're crying fire a little bit too early?
Man, talk about a heavy subject. Hate to see this when the whole world is essentially requiring a phone of some capacity for most people these days. This is a very unfortunate situation.
Mm-hmm.
The problem that I struggle with this particular situation is that I pretty much only use F-Droid out of principle, not because there's something in there that I can't get on a different source like Google Play or whatever. And I'm required to have a phone for certain things, like they don't publish an Okta app for 2FA, or there's several of those where the apps don't actually exist on the computer, or definitely not in a computing device that I own. And so that means that I have to have these things anyways. And so from my perspective, there is no real large usage change to the phone that I have. It is and will remain as trusted as it currently is, regardless of this, right? So there's been some argument about the idea that people will have to trust their phones less, and there may be a very small subsection of people that is the truth for, right? Because there are people that it has to be open source and I'm not going to run it from the Play Store and all those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. But I would argue that even among those of us who are flashing alternative ROMs and all that sort of stuff, the vast majority of us are probably getting most of our stuff from a source that would also be on Play Store, right? So for example, the Jellyfin client, you might be able to get that from Obtainium to get the latest version, but it's also in the Play Store, or Audio Bookshelf, or, there's a huge raft of things that I could go down the list of that I consider mainstream things that are already on the Play Store. And so I think for the vast majority of us, with F-Droid going away and this change being made, should that all happen, it's not going to be a seismic shift in usage pattern.
So here's one thing. Okay, so with that, because I do think we're maybe a bit on the early side. At the same time, from their point of view, if you have an app and you want to distribute it, and let's say you're an app developer that isn't going to register with the Google Play Store, so then that app is maybe only available through F-Droid. Now, admittedly, I am going down the road less traveled here. You've correctly and very articulate laid out that this isn't the vast majority of people. It's not the majority of app developers. It's not the majority of apps. So that aside, there are going to be some apps that may not be available because that app developer, for one reason or another, Google won't accept it, this, that, or the other thing. The other thing that occurs to me is what happens with older phones. So one of the things that I've really come to appreciate about F-Droid, yeah, it's helpful. It was helpful the handful of times that things like, there was a time where Element got taken off the Play Store for like 24 hours. And yeah, it was kind of nice that it was available in another alternative thing. So there are absolutely times where Google makes a decision and now there's competition in that market space. I do like that. But the far more useful muscle with F-Droid, for me anyway, has been with older phones. So you have a phone, you open the Play Store and it says, this phone, you can't use this without updating Google Play Services. You try to update Google Play Services, there's no update available for this phone, and you're just your host. So there would ordinarily not be a way to install an app on that phone. Well, you can go to fdroid.org, you can download F-Droid. It asks your permission for Chrome to install an APK. You give a permission, it says okay. installs F-Droid, then you install F-Droid, it asks you for permission for F-Droid to install apps, and now you can go about the business of installing apps on that phone, to include installing the Aurora store and then installing everything that's available on Google Play, but you can't actually install it on Google Play. Now, again, I know that I'm stretching the boundaries of use cases here, but there are some peripheries that would be impacted. Here's what I think is the biggest problem, though. And I think this is ultimately where my limitations are going to hit the road with this. Once you can no longer sideload apps, the decision that they're choosing to make, albeit a decision they're choosing to make by saying that it won't affect anybody or nobody will care, is you no longer get to choose the code that runs on your phone. Google will choose the code that runs on your phone. And the problem that I have with that is it means that it feels like a rented device. We're back to, I feel like I don't have administrative access to my phone anymore. And so I imagine there are going to be some use cases, as you've correctly pointed out. There are some things where the world expects you to have a smartphone. So I'm not sure how I'm going to navigate those things, but I feel like this is pulling me off the smartphone bandwagon. Do you think there's validity to that, or do you think that ship is so far gone that trying to get off the smartphone bandwagon, especially for guys who work in IT, am I lying to myself?
Well, first I want to take a step back and address your use case of like the older phones.
Yeah.
So it is not lost on me that there's a large amount of irony that we didn't even plan in the show. That being, the opening stanza was about Windows 10 and its end of life and how you should get off of it because it's not secure. And then Noah's like, but this thing that I really like can be totally insecure and full of holes as long as I can continue to run my applications.
Yes. But there's plenty of apps you can use that don't require being connected to the internet. I might draw yourself there's actually a really wise guy. He's actually way technically sharper than I am, and he repurposes old Android phones as music players. It doesn't necessarily have to be connected to the internet. No,
it doesn't. I'm just
pointing
making
out the irony.
A note about the irony here, not to mention the fact that we know about old Bluetooth attacks that are prevalent on older devices.
Very true.
So, I mean, if all you're doing is using it as an extended MP3 player, have at it, Haas. But it sounds like that's not exactly what you're doing there. But either way, I just thought that was a moment of irony that neither of us caught in the pre-show.
Irony out of 10. It wasn't planned. It just happened that way.
That said, about the ship having sailed, there's always some fish that swim upstream. We call them salmon. So maybe you're just a salmon. They're short. They die, and that's the end of them. And so maybe that'll be it. You'll swim upstream. You'll get to your spawn point, and you'll kick off. And that'll be the end of your technological journey.
Mm-hmm.
But for the vast majority of people, they're not going to be willing to do this. And so you think that you're a niche now in the Linux ecosystem compared to the wider ecosystem. You're going to throw yourself back into, I'm a Linux user in 1993, right? Like that's the level of nicheness that you're going to throw yourself back to in terms of like being a technology person and having no access to a smartphone. And I'm saying this as a person that hates the fact that I actually have to have access to a smartphone.
Sure.
Right. I think that, well, I would say then you don't actually have a client that's going to require you to have one of those weird 2FA, well, not weird, but one of those 2FA situations where they require you a phone. So in this particular client that I've had in the past, I actually have to use the biometrics in the phone, even if I'm getting just like a push text or like if it pops up on the screen and says like push your biometrics, and then we'll know it's you. And so like there is no, I have this app on my phone, or on my computer, because there are some 2FA apps that may be available for Windows, for example. But in this case, I don't believe those apps even work on computers. They expect you to have a phone with biometrics on it.
I am terrified that I am watching before my very eyes the slow evolve or devolve, depending on your point of view, into the smartphone world. Like the current is so strong. I don't know if you're following along with the EU regulations, but they are moving towards a digital ID. And so, they want everybody to have smartphones, and they want them to have apps, and they want them to have a digital ID on there. And I've brought this up on the show before, but it was such a poignant, eloquent point. We value the way the government identifies us more than we value usernames and cryptographic IDs, which for decades has been the way that we have verified authenticity. And it's like that overnight, we have changed to say, the only way I really trust you as a nerd on the internet, as a fellow nerd on the internet, is if you've gone through a government process to be verified, and if a software company then uses that government verification to perpetuate. And I don't know, I really struggle with that. But what is there? Can you think of any other option for a person who doesn't want to live in the Google world or the Apple world? If they go this route, do you think that there'll be an option for the Lineage OSs of the world or the Graphene OSs of the world to say, screw this noise, we'll fork it and we'll carry on? Or is the idea of maintaining and or updating a fork of the traditional Android operating system such a monumental, gargantuan task that it takes a company like Google? And if you can't ride in a sidecar and just, pull the updates down, is just not practical.
I'm not exactly sure how to answer that, because all of those things that you just mentioned, with the exception of any kind of Linux phone that is really kind of in an alpha stage to begin with, are standing on top of the open source code that exists in the Android ecosystem to begin with. If Google continues to close this down, it really wouldn't matter what technical things Graphene or Lineage might be able to do in terms of working around it. Like if that code that is checking for the signing exists in the AOSP project, right, then sure, we've got smart people and motivated people in the open source community, and they'll probably find a way to put like an if else statement in there to just toggle that off. But if it exists in a place where you can't see it, and it is so for example, firmware, like a firmware blob, there's not anything they could do about it, and they're dead in the water.
I'm afraid that's where we're headed. I guess we'll watch with bated breath, as they say. But
you're just bringing the doom and gloom. Hey, Windows people, you're all screwed. Your stuff is obsolete. Hey, Android people, your stuff is. You're like the Oprah, the reverse Oprah.
You don't get a thing. You don't get a thing. You don't get a thing. I don't know, Steve. I'm watching an organization. I'm watching an organization stare at their budget, then look down at their choices of technology, and say, this very expensive, very proprietary, very cloud-dependent thing is what we're currently using. What do we use it for? Well, largely to go to google.com and to go to drive.google.com and open up Docs in Google Docs. And so it's a web browser. Yeah, basically. Okay, so like a Chromebook would work here, but yet we've got this very proprietary, very expensive thing. Meanwhile, it is decimating the budget, and we're not willing to consider alternatives. We don't like the idea of alternatives because, it's like a baby with a poopy diaper. It's warm and it's stinky, but dang it, it's mine. So leave me alone, right? And so seeing that firsthand, watching what Microsoft is doing with recall, and I had this right-hand to God true story this week. We had a client. The ticket comes in as, I can't look up the password for this particular thing. It's in a KeyPass file. This should not be difficult. What's going on? How did KeyPass fail? Well, it turns out KeyPass is doing something. We suspect, this is yet to be confirmed, but we suspect that KeyPass is doing a thing to prevent Microsoft Recall from screenshotting the thing. And so it was blocking you to be able to actually see the window. And it's just dumb little stuff like that I am looking, I'm like, man, the computing environment is not, we're not getting to a better place. We're getting, with the advent of AI and the incorporation of all this stuff and things becoming more and more cloud dependent, there are people out there right now that walked into a big box store and walked out with a brand new Windows 11 computer and got it back home to the farm or the shack or the whatever and turned it on only to find out you can't log in if you don't have a Microsoft account and you don't have an internet connection. And the idea that you can spend $5, $6, $7, $8, $9, $10, $1,000, $1,200 on a computer and get it home and not be able to use it is just unfathomable to me. The fact that we had an option, right? If you wanted the closed down locked ecosystem, I'm too dumb to be able to figure out what software I want to install and what I don't. We already had that. It was called Apple. And you went to iOS and Apple will curate and only allow you to install software that won't hurt you. And so if you never really move past third grade, then there's an option for you. For the rest of us that want to be able to leverage the device to its full potential, I thought that's what Google was giving us. And it feels like my rug is getting pulled out from under me and I'm upset about it. And that's where the doom and gloom comes from.
Yeah, you're coming in hot. Normally it's me with the hot take. You're quite fired up.
I'm a little cynical, I know. But here's, I'll leave it at this. I don't see the light yet at the end of the tunnel that isn't an oncoming train, but I'm going to continue to watch the light. And the second that I determine it's not an oncoming train and that there is another option, then you'll be the first people to talk about it. Because let me tell you, nobody is more motivated than I to land on a more happy solution. And who knows, maybe this will be the kick in the pants that we've needed to get Linux on the smartphone to catch up the next 15 years and join the ranks of Apple and Google. Who knows? It could happen. All right.
Just as a last thought, I'll give you a little ray of hope. How about that?
Need it.
If we look back at technology running, the last 200 years, and I don't just mean computer technology, it follows the same cycle all the time, where we start with an open system where there's easily accessible, and then it gains mass adoption and it gets closed down. And things are terrible for a time, whether it's a decade or 2 decades or whatever. And then there's a breakthrough, and the breakthrough leads to openness. And it cycles like this and has cycled like this for the last 3 centuries or more. And I think you'll continue to see this. So I don't think that there will be, I honestly think that what's happening is the phones are going to get closed down. And while we don't know what that is right now, it is likely that an advancement in the future is going to bring that back. Because if you look at any of the inventions or the technology in the past that really closed down industries, everybody felt the same thing. It's like we can't see for the forest in front of us because it's doom and gloom, and this is the only thing we've ever known, and of this type or whatever, and nobody can see a way out of it because we don't know what technology is going to be around the corner that will enable us to break out of that cycle and hit an open stride again.
I like that. So it's kind of like we were in the late 80s, early 90s, and everything was a terminal, right? And it linked up to a central computer, and then eventually it became personal, and then it went back to cloud, and then it came back to personal. So I just have to wait for the cycle to swing back around. That's what you're telling me.
Yeah, pretty much. Like you look at the hardware, like how we started with a closed hardware, and then IBM happened, and then the IBM clones happened, and so we entered a sphere of like openness, and then the hardware went closed back down as people consolidated on AIX and all the other things, and then it opened back up again in the early mid 2000s, and now it's in the process of closing back down again, and then it'll open up again in the future with maybe quantum computing or something.
I love it. Okay, well, I'm glad there's a ray of hope. That's good. Here's something. Jellyfin RC 10.11 is out. This is an incredible update. Now, we've had the Jellyfin folks on Ask Noah in the past. I will extend an invitation to see if they'd like to return. But this is the upgrade that many of you have been waiting for. Now, it requires Jellyfin 10.10x. But the big news here is the EF Core database migration. So if you've used Jellyfin, what you find is your library would get to a certain point and then you would begin to struggle because it needed a more robust backend database. And so they have done that. Now, there is a very long migration process that has to happen. If you start that migration process, the key point here is do not interrupt it. Don't power cycle it. Don't get impatient. Go take yourself out for a nice dinner. Go out for coffee afterwards. Have some ice cream. See a movie. And then come back and Jellyfin will be done. You'll want to remove any plugins and reinstall those after the upgrade. You want to get it down to as bare minimum as possible when you go and run the upgrade. Certain features are not going to be re-implemented yet. Some plugins are going to need some time for them to issue an update for. And at the time of the recording of this podcast, it's 64-bit ARM only. So there's not going to be any support for 32-bit. They're also going to remove internal TLS SSL in future versions. So you can see all of the release notes at notes.jellyfin.org, which is their HackMD instance. Steve, are you a Jellyfin user? And if so, are you excited for the upgrade of the database engine?
I am a Jellyfin user. Actually, it's been the central hub for our media for, I don't know, the first time that I got hints that Plex was doing hinky things with kind of paying attention to what's in your library. That was several years ago. Mm-hmm. We are, even though we use it every day, like literally every day, I wouldn't call us even heavy or power users from it. So we haven't really had any major issues. Most of the issues we have with Jellyfin honestly come from front end issues. So we often will use Jellyfin for the Jellyfin app for very specific things. Otherwise, we slam Kodi in front of it and use Kodi as the front end for it. So haven't really had much. We haven't really had any real major concerns with it.
Talk to me about using Kodi as a front end for Jellyfin. So our house is exclusively Kodi at the moment, and I have struggled to move to anything else in part because I've yet to find something that Kodi doesn't do that I want it to do. Talk to me about if I were to use Jellyfin as the backend for Kodi, what that would look like.
So there are a couple of options that you can do. And I can't even remember the other ones we're not using well enough to enumerate them. But essentially, what we're doing is, you know how you add a library into Kodi by feeding it a different source, mm-hmm. right? In this case, we are using Jellyfin as a source. And so it communicates directly with Jellyfin to include the fact that when you can't run an update on Kodi and have new shows or movies or whatever show up, it is dependent on the Jellyfin side of things. So when you open up Kodi, what it actually does is it updates its database from Jellyfin. And so that communication happens that way. And so I'm not exactly sure how the technicals work on the back end, but essentially Kodi is the front end for Jellyfin on the back end. And if Jellyfin's not available, obviously, then you can't do anything. But it works to the bonus of the way that we have it set up is that it keeps the watch status in sync. And so if obviously we don't have Kodi on our mobile devices or anything like that. So when we go traveling, the watch status stays synced and we just continue off where we left off.
Interesting. Okay, so it's really about tracking progress is what that's the big thing that you feel like you get with Jellyfin as the back end.
Yeah, I would say so. It doesn't also make a ton of sense for us to have the library exposed in both places for Kodi to scrape the library and then Jellyfin to scrape the library, and then both kind of doing the same task. That didn't make a ton of sense. We leverage a bunch of stuff from Jellyfin specifically. So like we use Jellyfin to download specific. Well, let me rephrase that. We use PinchFlat to download specific YouTube channels. So, for example, Naomi Brockwell has a privacy channel that is really good, wonderful, excellent information, good videos, good content that we let the kids watch, but we don't want them to monkey around on YouTube. And so PinchFlat will actually download and store metadata for Jellyfin, specifically so that when you look at it, it shows up like a regular TV show with all the metadata you think of. So we use that, and we use Jellyfin to capture live TV streams. And so we use Jellyfin for those other things, and we use Kodi for watching, like, the Blu-rays or whatever that we bought.
Okay. Because in that case, it's not so much about what episode am I on, that sort of thing. I just need a movie to play off the file server.
Yeah, and so because we're already integrating with Jellyfin like that, and it tracks across mobile, and honestly, it makes my life much easier on my laptop when I'm traveling. If I just fire up the Jellyfin interface, than it would be for me to fire up Kodi and then try to have it play the fat files over the internet, right? Because it also gives me, Jellyfin also gives you the ability to downclock the bit rate. So if you're on a very poor connection, like at the hotel, and so we just finished watching Lord of the Rings Extended Edition, and my Blu-rays are like, my Blu-ray rips I think are like 60 gigs. There's no way I'd be able to watch that over Kodi over the internet in a hotel room.
Right.
Whereas in Jellyfin, I can just toggle the bit rate down.
Interesting. And it's doing transcoding on the front end of it?
Yeah, well, because Jellyfin is the back end where Kodi plugs into it and stuff like that, it gets the bit rate from Jellyfin, and Jellyfin is doing the transcoding.
Interesting. Really interesting. So do you think that you'll see, if they make a switch with the database backend, you would see that performance difference, because that is what's handling things like, what am I on? What episode am I on? What am I doing? That sort of thing, right?
Maybe. But like I said, we're not, even though we use it every day, we're not like the power users. So maybe we would see it.
For the most part, it's just next episode in the series sort of a thing.
Well, because we haven't had we haven't had anything where like, this really is a terrible experience in Jellyfin outside of the actual UI. And so would I see any difference? I don't know, because we haven't been dissatisfied.
Interesting. Very interesting. Well, it's a really cool thing. I'm really happy to see that the Jellyfin folks are progressing forward. I was a little worried there for a period of time, wondering if we were going to make some real progress, but this is going to, I think this is going to cause me to reevaluate my media thing. One of the things that I have thought about many times, do your kids use the Jellyfin interface as a version of Netflix, for lack of a better way to frame that, but the way that their friends or people at school, whatever, the way the rest of society uses like a Netflix or a YouTube thing, where you have a list and a videos and those sorts of things. Does that appeal to your kids or your family at all?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was talking about when the YouTube channels that we mirror locally, we expose them, and they show up exactly like you're talking about in the let's say Netflix style interface that you can pick. And so if you tried to do that with Kodi, it wouldn't really work that way, right? It's just a bunch of files in a directory, and you'd have to name the files appropriately and pick the next one and all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely.
Right? So yes,
I love it. All right. Hey, the music in our ears means we're out of time. I thank you for joining us. We record the show every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central. You'll notice even when Steve's traveling, we still find a way to make it work. We invite you to check out the show notes. You can find those at podcast.asknoahshow.com. There you'll find all of the articles and references we use to make the show, as well as the entire back catalog. We go all the way back to episode 1. Some places trim their RS feeds, not I. We keep them there for you. You can keep up to date with the latest by following the show at Ask Noah Show on X. Find me at noahc.us. We're back next week, asknoahshow.com.